Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. State Representative Dwight Kay is here today to speak about the political stalemate in the state of Illinois and the damage that it's causing to Metro East school districts. It's common knowledge that the state of Illinois is in deep financial trouble. The state budget expired at midnight on July 1st, 2015. Since then, increased borrowing and increased long-term debt had put some school districts on the state's watch list. To make money go further, districts have increased class size, while at the same time, they've cut teachers and staff. Yet, as of June 2016, there is no solution in sight. The legislature recently adjourned without passing a new budget. On January 8th, Moody's Investor Service cut Illinois' credit rating to Baa2, which is slightly above junk bond status. Representative Kay has been invited here today to explain what can be done to improve local school district finances. We also hope Mr. Kay will be able to instruct us as to why Illinois has not passed a budget and what the future may look like. Dwight Kay, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Before we get into the school issue, I want to refer people to a YouTube video that I saw, about 6 minutes of you on the floor of the legislature reading from the proposed Illinois budget. I guess that's what you're reading from. And you were talking with the Democrat leader, who I guess is number 2 under Madigan.
Correct.
And you were asking questions in a state that's completely broke. Why are we spending these various line items?
That's correct.
I would refer people to that. They ought to really go look at that. Just look up, Dwight Kay and ditto, I think is what I looked up. Because this woman was reduced to every time you asked a question, instead of answering her question, all she said was ditto, which actually meant nothing under the circumstances. Would you care to elaborate on what was going on?
Well, it was the last week of session before we adjourned, and the Democrats ran out the largest spending bill in the history of Illinois. It was roughly $40 billion, give or take some change.
And how much do you take in?
Well, this year we'll take in about $32.5 billion, according to COGFA.
Okay, so,
and that's a good number.
So 32 and a half, and they were proposing to spend 40.
That's correct.
Okay, so how do they explain this $7.5 billion difference?
Well, they don't, and that was the purpose of my debate with Barbara Flynn Curry. I think it's fair for the taxpayers to understand what their money is being used for, and so it was my intent to go line by line through that budget. And I think if you watched that 6 minutes, you could tell that it was very frustrating for her because she either didn't know the answer or she didn't want to provide the answer. But had we gone through the entire 500-page budget, people of Illinois, the taxpayers of Illinois, would have been astounded at the waste and mismanagement of state government.
Mm-hmm. In this 6 minute, there was a discussion. You were asking several questions, I guess, about the state fair at that point, and monies that had been allocated, $800,000 here, $200,000 there, $400,000 here, some of it for entertainment, some of it for, I forget what other categories. But you kept asking the question, when you're broke, how do you spend money like this? And you were asking the number 2 person in the legislature.
Correct.
To really no answer other than she kept pointing at the governor. Now, what has the governor got to do? I mean, does she have some legitimate point here, pointing to the governor?
No, she kept saying it's the governor's bill, it's the governor's numbers, and that's totally
I didn't think
false.
The governor didn't propose that budget, did he?
And that wasn't a budget. That was simply a spending bill because it had no revenue assigned to it. So what we were talking about was simply a massive spending bill that the House actually passed and sent to the Senate. Mm-hmm. But no, that was not the governor's budget.
Okay. In the state of Illinois, like many other states and the federal Constitution, monies don't come out of the Treasury except upon appropriation from the legislature and a signature by the governor. Is that the way it works in Illinois?
That's exactly right.
How is it then that judges were able to subvert the Constitution and say that you will spend money without an appropriation from the legislature?
Well, two things happened that caused us to spend money without appropriation. One, courts mandated that the state go ahead and pay monies that were owed under consent decrees, and we've got a number of those that have been applied by federal courts to the state of Illinois, monies that had to be paid. Secondly, we had contracts with people, and those contracts had to do with state employees who were doing state work. And two judges, one, there was a difference of opinion between Cook County and St. Clair County, but a St. Clair County judge said the state of Illinois will pay the bills for those people who are under contract and doing work for the state of Illinois.
Now, my understanding is that each year or each 2 years stands alone.
Each year.
Each year stands alone.
Correct.
And so that judges are take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Illinois and of the United States, but the state of Illinois. Constitution of the state of Illinois says that no monies get expended without appropriation from the legislature signed by the governor. How do judges get away with saying that they don't need to follow the Constitution of the state of Illinois?
Well, I think we need to back up. I think the judges may be somewhat restrained in that regard because the Constitution also says that the General Assembly has the duty to present the governor with a budget. And it also says a balanced budget based upon estimated revenues. Doesn't have to be a precise number, but it has to be a number that's within reason you can assume will be taken in. So judges at this point are not going to step in and become the legislature because they're not that part of government. They're not that branch of government.
Mm-hmm. Well, they seem to be acting so when they tell you that monies that go into, monies are pouring into the treasurer. So you're saying that about $32.5 billion during this fiscal year are going to pour into the Illinois Treasury. Is that correct?
In and out.
Well, I'm just talking about in.
Right.
The only way that it comes out is upon appropriation.
Correct.
There's not one dime is supposed to come out of that bank account that hasn't been appropriated. Well, I shouldn't say not one dime, but most of the money that goes in there is not supposed to come out unless the legislature has appropriated it and the governor has signed for it.
That's correct.
Okay. And so these judges, while they think they're doing good by forcing people to be paid for work that they're doing, to me just sort of takes the cork off of the steam. And people would be really riled if people weren't getting paid and they would be forcing the legislature to do their job.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I think you make a good point. I think it's certainly unacceptable in my mind and to a great extent shameful that a state has gone almost 2 years without a budget. I don't know where that's happened in the nation besides the state of Illinois.
All right. Now, guide me here. Is there in Illinois a requirement that a specific percentage of the budget be spent on education?
No.
Okay, because in the state of Missouri, there is a specific amount that has to be, minimum that has to be spent. Now, there is a formula, though, which the state government uses in order to pay, to make sure that school districts have supplemental money to property tax that they collect in their home district.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. But apparently they're not getting all of it or some of it, but enough of it to where they are now in deep trouble.
Well, here, just a little history here. Illinois is unlike Missouri in that we have what we call a state aid formula. So that formula, as archaic as it is, and only another state beside Illinois has anything that's even close to what we use. It's a relic, but we still use it. And basically, it's it's a convoluted way of taking property tax money and then looking at what the school district's needs are above and beyond that and providing then general state aid. Well, general state aid, as I know it, is a fixed number, and that fixed number should be the same for any given district, whether it's a rich district or a poor district. Now, we've managed to, by some machination of the mathematics that we do in Springfield, we've managed to keep poor districts poor and the rich districts a little bit richer. And that to me seems not fair and not balanced.
Now, I had a sit down with the superintendent of schools of Edwardsville School District, Dr. Andre, who is the superintendent that replaced Dr. Hightower, who had been there for a couple of decades. And Dr. Andre said that Edwardsville, this I found just absolutely shocking, that the Edwardsville School District, which has often been considered one of the premier districts in Metro East, has spent through all of its reserve cash, has borrowed money and had to spend through all that, has reduced staff, reduced teachers, and has increased class size up to, I think, the maximum that their contract will allow. And then she points the finger and says, well, how come we can't get our state money and they're throwing an extra $10 million at East St. Louis? And she's got 95% of her kids going to college, and East St. Louis has, you know, a very minimal number of students that are going to college. Now, going to college is not the point. The point is how well educated the students are coming out of Edwardsville versus how well educated they're coming out of the East St. Louis system. So what's the story with that? Are you familiar with this $10 million that went to East St. Louis?
Well, I'm familiar with it. If you will, it was additional monies based on this, again, archaic formula that exists, which allowed the state and the State Board of Education to make a recommendation to the General Assembly that an impoverished district such as East St. Louis could get additional funds. So it's not unheard of. That's not the first time it's happened. It's not the first time it's happened in East St. Louis. The better question is it the best thing to do? And I would argue that when you give that amount of money to a school district, you need to look at performance metrics, and if they're not good, then with that $10 million comes a review and maybe a re-engineering of their programs in East St. Louis.
Well, it makes sense to pay for performance. I mean, you know, parents do that all the time. Hey, you know, you go out and cut the lawn, you get your allowance. You do this extra thing, you get some extra money.
Right.
You would think that in a district where a large number of students are well prepared enough to be able to go to college, that's performance. In a district where a large number of students can barely read and write, that's a real problem. Why are we paying any monies extra when you're not getting even that level of performance?
Well, that gets into an area that we talk about often in the private sector, and that has to do with performance and good management and results. We don't talk much about that when it comes to how state money is used, where it's sent, and what the results are. And that's probably one of our biggest downfalls. But let me just run back to East St. Louis for just a second.
Yes.
I'm not going to defend them, but I'm going to say this. Most people don't understand that the residents of East St. Louis pay more in their district and in their county for education than the people of Chicago do for the Chicago public school system. So while we have helped them, they've also done more than the students and the taxpayers in Cook County.
Okay, that noted. And yet, they are not seemingly getting much for their money.
I think you could say that. I think that's been, it's been mentioned, it's been debated on the House floor, and I think the general consensus is that politically speaking, and I'm just saying politically speaking, it would not be a good thing for us, that is the General Assembly, to allow East St. Louis to fail, which goes back to my point before. When you tender $10 million to somebody as emergency money, so to speak, you expect, along with that $10 million, a protocol which suggests there will be results forthcoming, because you just can't keep that's the problem with Illinois. We chase problems with money and never expect any different results.
I understand. And I mean, I'm going to be very blunt about it because I've looked at this issue of schools right here on this set for over 15 years. And it appears to me that schools are actually a mechanism for transferring tax money to a group of teachers, transferring them to a group of janitors, to a group of administrators, to a group of vendors, and all they have to do to get all this pay is put up with students. That appears to me to be the process of public education as we see it today.
Well,
not in all districts, but in many districts.
Yeah, I see it, and I wouldn't disagree with you. Here's what I would tell you, just on the flip side of that. One of the problems that brings about a place like East St. Louis or the Chicago public school system is the fact that we now have what I believe to be government-controlled education. It starts in Washington, D.C. It is then funneled down to Springfield. Springfield feels like they have to follow the mandates to get that little extra federal money. And then the school systems in the state of Illinois are forced in some part, whether it's full or part, to buy into and use the systems that Washington, D.C. would like to see us use in our curriculum, be taught to our students. I disagree with that. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think, frankly, to be candid with you, it's a joke.
Right. Well, before, when you were talking about East St. Louis and the monies that they are paying in on their own, I'm thinking like, well, yeah, then they should have more control. Therefore, they should have more say in the outcome of the student education, and that it falls onto them. If students are educated, bravo. If they're not educated, hey, what did you do wrong?
Fair enough.
This is your deal. Perhaps school districts ought to stop depending on the state or the federal government altogether and just create enough money within their districts and live within that budget that they can create.
Well, I wouldn't mind, and again, don't disagree with you. I just want the federal government to take a step back and leave the state of Illinois alone. I think Illinois would do fine on its own, given a more stable financial situation. But the last thing we need is intervention from Washington, D.C., because they've got their own set of problems.
Yes. Well, they have concerns which cost districts extra money. During the course of my conversation, well, maybe it was, I won't even get into that because that was a private discussion, so I'm not going to get into it. But there are concerns about social issues which are brought up at the federal level that wind up costing school districts money, even though it may not even be a problem in those school districts.
Well, you make a good point. You talk to any school district in southern Illinois, and I don't talk to them much beyond, I'd say Bloomington, maybe south. You talk to districts from Bloomington south, and they will tell you their number one concern when it comes to trying to meet a budget has to do with mandates. We've got mandate on mandate on mandate. We have tiered one after another, and they're costly.
I'm going to say this, and we're going to change the subject slightly. There's a little something that I've done for a number of years. Go to the grocery store with my wife. She'll be paying for the groceries back with the cashier. I'll be down with the bag boy or bag girl. And I'll be like, oh, where do you go to school? And they'll tell me, and usually it's a high school. They're usually like juniors or seniors. Oh, they work you pretty hard. Yeah, you taking math? Oh, yeah. They work you hard? Yeah. You doing okay? Yeah. How much is 4 squared? And then they get that deer in the headlight look, okay? And if they get that one, then I'll ask them, what's the square root of 25? And again, now I've had a couple of kids just boom, boom, boom. They just answer. But most of them haven't got a clue. Or if you talk about other topics that are things that me and my peers learned back in 7th and 8th grade, not in high school, and these, legions of young people haven't got a clue. So for all the money that we're spending, I don't know that these children are what we call educated. They may be trained, but they're not educated.
Well, let me just take a minute and tell you that I saw a graduating classes high school test that was mandated in this district back in 1913. That's Edwardsville, Glen Carbon. And I saw all of the questions that were asked. And I would guarantee you today that the average person would have a very difficult time passing that exam. So back in 1913, we were doing things either differently from an instructional standpoint, or the curriculum was different, or the focus was different. But I will tell you, in 1913, I think we prepared our students better than we do today. And having said that, we've got in this area some of the finest school districts.
I think it's a matter of expectations, what we expect of people. And just in general, Americans have had less and less expectations of themselves. And so they therefore have less and less expectations of the capabilities of their children. Yeah. And that, I believe that's the real problem. Now, coming back to the more salient issue here of what are we going to do, if anything, in order to get these districts out of the financial doldrums? Short of a complete reconstruction of the educational system, what can be done by the legislature, or what will be done by the legislature in order to finance them?
Well, I'm going to take that in two parts. First of all, we need to know how we got where we did, or where we are today.
Well, I think we already know that.
Well, but most people don't understand that the General Assembly has not funded school districts correctly. In other words, they've been prorating general state aid for one reason or another based on this formula we talked about.
When you say prorate, they were actually entitled to $100, and instead they got $80.
Let's say they're entitled to $6,000 and they got $5,000.
Right.
And then they got $5,500 and then $5,000.
Right.
And that's a true statement in many cases.
Yes, I've heard that term proration being used.
So the state decided that, again, they knew what was best when doling out or dispersing monies to various districts.
Breaking their own rules.
Breaking their own rules, exactly. Right. Isn't that interesting? And I'll use District 7 as an example because I know it to be true. They haven't received their full state-funded general state aid amount per student since 1989. And it may be before. I just have not had time to look at it. Some people say it's long before that. So when you ask people to work at a deficit year after year after year, and you break a promise, then you're going to have every school district, with the exception of maybe a New Trier up in northern Illinois, maybe they don't have a problem around Evanston, you're going to have every school district in jeopardy. And you're going to have them in the same shape that District 7 is in. And quite frankly, Granite City is in. And I haven't checked with Collinsville lately, but the last time I checked, they were doing pretty good, but concerned. So here we've got this history of doing the wrong thing after we make a promise. We've broken our promise for 20 years, 25 years. That's the first problem. The second problem is that we need to stop it. We need to pass within the next 2 weeks, or we're just going to exacerbate the problem. Within the next 2 weeks, we need to pass a budget which Leader Durkin and myself have co-sponsored. And it's a spending bill for education, but it's really a balanced budget stopgap that will get us through to the end of the year. That means...
For not education, you're talking about for the whole state.
I'm talking about for the whole state, not just District 10, District 7. I'm talking about for the entire state. It's money appropriated, and it's money behind that. In other words, we're going to pay the bills that we're saying we're going to spend money for. Included in that is education. It's for K through 12, it's for state universities, it's for community colleges. It'll also go as far as corrections. And by the way, even in that education piece, there's $105 million additional money that's for hold harmless issues. And that's a whole different area. It's one of these things we get into, and it's a protective device. It's okay, but we have $105 million in there ready to go. It's very interesting. It's a balanced budget for a half a year, which I don't much care for, partial year budgets, but apparently that's the best we can do. But Lee, what happened to that budget? It's stuck in rules. It's the first balanced budget proposal we've had. It's not attached to the governor's turnaround agenda. It's a clean bill, and it won't get out of rules.
Explain to people briefly, very briefly, because we're under 5 minutes now. What does the Rules Committee do?
Well, the Rules Committee basically determines where a bill will be assigned. And in this case, it could go to secondary education, it could go to higher education, but it needs to go to one of the two. You know,
But they aren't assigning it to a committee, which means it can't be heard, which means it can't be passed.
That's correct.
And so it's got to come out of rules.
Well,
and who controls this Rules Committee?
Well, in theory, we have a chairman who controls that committee. In reality, Mike Madigan controls that committee.
Both Democrats?
Both Democrats.
Right. Now, I hate to turn this into a partisan issue. By the way, we've got about 3 minutes here.
Sure.
I hate to turn this into a partisan issue. What is it that the public can do in order to see to their own interests? Because obviously the legislature is not seeing to their interests.
Well, you're exactly right. We have politicized Springfield to the extent that it's no longer about people, it's all about politics. And so when you know that and you're the guy paying the bill, that's the taxpayer. You're the guy paying the bill, and no one's responsible to you. You need to go to your state representative, you need to write your state representative, you need to go to his office, and you need to make your displeasure known, because quite frankly, taxpayers in the state of Illinois have been and continue to be fleeced, and we don't have people on the opposite side of the aisle that can answer questions about their very own budget. So we need to hold them accountable. That's what's wrong with Illinois, is a lack of accountability and maybe just a lack of understanding when it comes to math.
Yes, I remember hearing during that 6 minutes that that you mentioned to this Democrat lady that, what was her name?
Barbara Flynn Curry.
Barbara Flynn Curry.
Correct.
That she had never run a business, in your opinion, because if she had run a business, she would know that you can't continuously run deficits and continue to be in business.
Precisely.
Did she ever respond to any of these issues that you brought up about how I mean, a state, while it doesn't look like a business, has to be run like a business, otherwise it goes out of business. And you got 30 seconds here.
Well, our state is the biggest business, or at least would qualify as one of the top 5 businesses in Illinois if you look at the revenues that are coming in. So we run it as a political entity, we need to run it as a business, we need to hold people accountable, and we need to have monies spent according to appropriated monies, not spending bills. That's where we've gone wrong. We've headed down the wrong path. So today, we've got 2 weeks to get a budget passed. I think we can do it if we use...
By what date does this have to be passed?
The end of the month.
End of June.
End of June.
Okay.
We have a balanced budget out there. It's stopgap, it's funded, and it covers everything we need to cover.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I certainly appreciate it. It's a sad story, but thanks.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I've been speaking with State Representative Dwight Kay. He represents the District 112, which includes Edwardsville, Glen Carbon, Collinsville, some other areas. You've listened to this. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube. You might want to actually go to YouTube, look this up, look up Conversation with Lead Presser Dwight Kay, and show it to your friends. Thank you. See you next time.